Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for watching or listening, whoever you're engaging with us. I'm Alex DeRosa. I'm our lead pastor here at New Life, and this is Pastor Chris Marshall, our founding pastor. And once again, we have a question that we've been asked, and I wanted to bring it up. This is one that I asked a lot growing up, and I had to wrestle with it and engage alongside it. And then recently, I had an email asking about this from someone here in our church family, and I was honestly very excited to tackle it. And so we're going to talk about science today, because growing up, I heard that science and religion were in opposition, that you couldn't believe in God and really engage with science in the same mind, because they were not things that worked alongside each other. So we're going to ask that question. Do science and religion work together? Can we be Christians but also agree with what science finds? And is there some nuance there, as there is with so many things? And so, Chris, do you want to kick us off with some thoughts on that?
Yeah, actually, I've been reading a book called Tactics. It's a very good book. It's how you can, as a Christian, how you can respond to some of these questions that people ask. And the author said, and I agree with him, obviously we want to affirm science. But what do we mean by science?
Yeah.
And science is a method. Actually, it's a series of methods, trial and error. And it's the thing that tells us for every cause there's an effect. Yeah. Really, that's what science boils down to. For every cause, there's an effect. We see an effect, we come back and look for the cause. But faith or religion, I would rather use the word faith. Faith in God comes back to someone who is uncaused cause. You know, a scientist asks you, who created God? I can't answer that scientifically, because they say, most scientists will say, they have a philosophy. It's a materialist philosophy. Every one of your answers has to have only scientific meaning, that you have to have material, and nothing miraculous can be happening. Nothing outside of the realm of the natural can be occurring. So there's a philosophy of science and scientific method. Scientific method doesn't preclude an uncaused cause.
No.
But they do if you bring the philosophy of science, which means it has to have a naturalist answer. Is there an intelligent designer? You know, if you look into the world scientifically, you find out there's a lot about the world that is scientifically points to a designer. Yes. But scientists can't agree with that, because that's not a natural answer.
Yep.
So I say science and faith or religion are not in conflict.
No.
But the philosophy of science and the philosophy of religion probably is.
Yeah, which makes sense. And we've come a long way since the beginning of science, because those who really kicked it off, this is just a list, people like Descartes and Kepler and Galileo and Locke and Copernicus and Faraday and Kelvin and Pasteur, Isaac Newton, Christians. Most of those guys were Christians, and so they were the pioneers of science, and they weren't looking to debunk God. Sometimes we think that that's what science is. It's debunking God, or it's giving a reason that's outside of God. But those guys were believers in Jesus, and they were looking to understand the miraculous around us. Isaac Newton once said, "This most beautiful system of the sun, planets, and comets could only proceed from the counsel and dominion of an intelligent and powerful being." So they wanted to say, okay, this was from God. How do we understand this amazing world? And honestly, what they said reminds me a lot of what King David said in the Psalms, which in Psalm 19, verses 1-4, "The heavens proclaim the glory of God. The skies display his craftsmanship." So very similar to what Isaac said. "Day after day they continue to speak. Night after night they make him known. They speak without a sound or word. Their voice is never heard. Yet their message has gone throughout the earth, and their words to all the world. God has made a home in the heavens for the sun." Basically, he's saying, he's looking up and says, someone had to create this. This is just beyond our knowledge or wisdom. And it seems to be that God created. Now, the argument that I've heard is that, King David didn't have modern science, so he surely just kind of was naive or childish in his thought. But then we look, and there's more and more evidence in science. What you said, like there's an intelligent design behind this. Like things didn't just happen. There's thousands of things that if they were, it's called the finely tuned argument.
Yeah.
If there's thousands of things that if they were just changed slightly, none of this works. Frank Turk is a guy that goes around a lot of college campuses, and he talks about faith arguments and whatnot. He wrote this book, co-wrote it. I can't remember his co-author, but he wrote this book called I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist, and it's a good read, and it has a lot of this evidence in it. And so he talks, I have a couple of them written down that he brought up or other people have brought up, things like if the rotation of the earth took longer than 24 hours, the temperature differences between night and day would be too great, and if the rotation period was shorter, atmospheric wind velocities would be too great. So either way, if things were a little different, we wouldn't work. I've read before that if the gravitational pull was 0.000, you go 37 zeros and then a 1. If it was that slightly different, gravitation would be off at a rate that was too great for the Earth to be where it is. And then we have, if the oxygen levels, which are 21%, if they were 25%, fires would break out continuously. If they were 15%, so a little over wouldn't be good, a little under, we would suffocate. Same thing with the CO2 levels, like if they were a little higher or a little lower, we would either burn up or suffocate. And so we have these evidences of like, if things just changed a tiny bit, it wouldn't work. But there's also the second law of thermodynamics, which scientists universally agree on, says that we're running out of resources, which I think points pretty easy to the fact that the world wasn't always here. And so if the world wasn't always here, something had to create it. Scientists have argued and wrestled on that, and they've kind of come to the conclusion of the Big Bang. Like, okay, well, something did start us because the second law of thermodynamics says that if we were always here, then everything would be depleted by now. Mm-hmm. And so something created it, but they can't figure out what that is. Some people think that it's like a math equation, like some numbers were kind of like moving around or something. They don't know. There is a new theory that like we're the second world, that there was a world before us that like exploded and then we came, but it still doesn't get to the root of what created that first universe.
World.
Well, what was there? And like who created that? And so there's still not a good answer, but they know that everything came from like one point. Like they can kind of get to this point where there's still radiation lines coming from one point, that the universe is actually still expanding, things are still being added, and they all agree on that there's a one point that things kicked off, and that's why the Big Bang. But we look in the Bible and say, look, oh yeah, like this is when God created everything. This is when he spoke and universe came out of it. So there is a definition, but and again, why I struggled with it is because my mind goes to the logic. I like the science of it. I want reason and rationale to help lead me to faith. And when I look at all of this evidence, it seems to point that there had to be something that was intelligent to design this. Nothing else really makes sense. Like what Frank Turk contends in his book is that there are other belief systems, but they take a much farther leap of faith than Christianity. You can believe that everything was an accident, but what else has accidentally just appeared before us in the last few thousands of years? We don't have any record of something just appearing out of nothing. And so why did it happen once and never again? Like, did something create that miracle? If that's the way it came, something surely created that miracle. And so I come to the fact that, like, actually, the more you understand science, the more you dive into it, the more you're going to be in awe of how God created us to work. I mean, neuroscientists are on there. Like, the more they dive into how our brains work, the more they're saying, like, this couldn't have been an accident. Like, all of these things firing off. Why would we all believe in the same moral code if we're all just accidents of just things, explosions in our minds? It just doesn't make sense. And so I think that there is a cohesion that we can have with science and with faith.
Yeah, I do too. This book, his tactics is sticking in my mind right now. He says there's a Big Bang. Well, who's the Big Banger?
Yeah.
There has to be somebody kicked off the Big Bang,
yeah.
You know, and what science leads us to believe is you take nothing and you add nothing and you get all of this. Yeah. And science tells us that every cause has an effect. There has to be a Big Banger if there's a Big Bang.
Yes.
And the reality is, it makes so much sense to me to say, okay, there was nothing but God.
Yeah.
And God said, let there be. And there was all of this.
Yeah.
And, it's so simple. It's so simple that if you don't believe it, I don't understand, And I'm talking about from a scientific standpoint. You look at another thing. Let's take the resurrection of Jesus, for example.
Yeah.
Okay, a scientific person says there couldn't have been a resurrection. Why not? Because there aren't any resurrections. That's really what they say. People don't rise from the dead, therefore Jesus didn't rise from the dead. What? What if somebody did rise from the dead? And the evidence that Jesus rose from the dead, I mean, the written evidence, the disciples,
Yes.
all of them were willing to die because they were not willing to say that Jesus was not still alive. And people have died for something, a lie that they thought was the truth. But nobody's died for a lie they thought was a lie.
Yes, no.
It just doesn't make sense.
No, and especially not all the men and women that died for that cause.
Yeah.
Who saw Jesus in the flesh and told people, and they could have gotten off easy by just saying, okay, we made it up. Please don't kill me in a horrific way, being crucified upside down or being stoned or being beheaded, being
Set
tortured.
on fire.
Yeah. You would say almost anything to get out of that. I think so. I would, at least. I wouldn't want to die that way. But they weren't willing to recant that because they know what they saw was true. And even if we go to like the realm of archaeology, one of the things that I've heard from people before, like, what about history? Like, if you go into history too far, will you be led away from Jesus? And I think the more you go into history, the more you're going to be led to Jesus. And every archaeological finding has actually supported the Bible. There's never been a time where they found something that goes like, ooh, is this against Scripture? No, every single time it points to, oh, this was part of an event, or this helps us to clarify what the Bible says about this. And they've been going back pretty far too. And one of the things that when we were in Israel together, and when we got to walk around where these ancient sites dug up these things that are we read about in the Bible, it brings it to life and goes, oh man, like this stuff isn't just made up. Like they have, like, from kings of old, like things that are carved in with their names and carved in with the people that are talked about in the Bible. It really like brings home. It doesn't lead you away from Jesus. It brings home the fact that this stuff is real.
One of the things that when we were in Israel and we were in Jerusalem, there's the Temple Mount was there, but the temple isn't there. And Jesus said, not one stone will that be upon another. And every stone of the temple was taken over the side of the Temple Mount. And it's there. You can see it. And you say, he saw it 70 years before it happened.
Yeah.
And the people that don't believe that, they say, well, Jesus didn't really say that. They put that into the story after it happened, so then you could say it. That it doesn't make sense. The other thing, all the manuscripts of the Bible, all the manuscripts, there's so many more than any other ancient document. It's everything. If you were willing to take a scientific approach and say, let's look at this scientifically, and let's say the conclusion comes to be that Jesus rose from the dead. The conclusion becomes there's a miracle. The conclusion comes there's a creator. Those are outside of material philosophy. So we can't say that. It's a logical conclusion that you come to, but you can't say that because scientists won't believe it. And that's the problem. It's I don't have enough faith to be an atheist.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah,
and what you're talking about with the manuscripts, that comes from a science called textual criticism, where they find how many and when they were written, and they can date them. And the manuscripts they found of the New Testament were written 30 years to like 130 years after Jesus was was walking on the earth, and that's so close to the time. No, there's nothing else like that in history. And so it's funny because we are talking about scientists in kind of this broad term. There's plenty of scientists that do believe in Jesus.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And there's plenty. I read something recently about how many scientists who work at NASA believe in God because they look into the universe and be like, there has to be someone that created this, and they're led to Jesus. And even the textual criticism, there was a scientist that was diving into the New Testament, and he found all the records, and he put all this together because he was trying to debunk Christianity, and he came to the conclusion at the end of all that, like, oh, this is true. Neuroscientists are very similar. Like they go down and they sit with people, and they're like, this doesn't make sense unless there's a creator
C.S.
out there.
Lewis is probably the most famous person that approached the Bible scientifically and approached the reality, and he was trying to debunk it, and he came to believe it.
Yeah, Dr. Francis Collins, who's the director of the Human Genome Project, came to believe in Jesus after looking at the evidence, just like C.S. Lewis did. Yeah, and so you have people that are some of the smartest people ever, and their conclusion was that Jesus is the Son of God who rose from the dead, and his Father created the universe. And so I think you look at those guys and say, because the greater, or I guess the deeper question about the science and faith is logic and faith. I think that's what mainly people are asking. Like, can I believe in God without having a blind faith? And I believe the answer to go to the heart of that is absolutely.
Absolutely.
Like, yeah,
absolutely.
We have evidence upon evidence that this isn't a blind faith thing. I wouldn't be here if that was the case, if you had to have blind faith.
You know, if blind faith is the best faith, then believing stuff you can't believe would be a sign of great faith.
Yeah,
It doesn't make sense.
Yes,
it makes no sense.
Yeah.
And really, we could go on and on, but really it doesn't. We don't have to.
No.
Because there does come a point where you have to take a leap of faith.
Yep.
You know, but it isn't a very big leap.
No.
You know, you don't have to leap across the Grand Canyon.
No.
Because there's all this evidence.
Yeah,
it's really almost like leaping across a puddle.
Yes.
You just have to take a little bit of faith and really a lot of reason.
Yes.
And you got God.
Yes, absolutely. And we will link both books that we mentioned in the notes for this so that you can look them up if you'd like to, if you want to explore that more. And as always, if you have more questions, you can reach out to us on there. But thank you so much for listening or watching. Again, however you engage with us. And we're excited to be back here soon with some more questions to walk through. Thank you very much.